I hear you love my pennants.
I love your pennants.
This is The Cross Section with Nate Lull and David Edelstein. Featuring special guest, Matthew Hazzard.
Another week of the cross section, everybody. David and I are excited today to be joined by one of my good friends, Cooperstown baseball assistant coach Matt Hazzard, and he's also helped out with boys basketball, girls basketball at various times. We always introduce him as kind of the mayor of Cooperstown when I have him on the radio on WCDO. So, Matt, this is great to have you on the cross section. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Would you be able to just start off by describing a little bit about your involvement in sports over the years, just so people have a little bit of a background to go off of from what your perspective is on everything?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to Cooperstown, graduated in Cooperstown, played 3 sports there, soccer, baseball, and basketball. Went to SUNY Cortland, was a sport management major and business economics. And from there, I played basketball and baseball there. And then went to Colorado, and I worked in professional sports for both golf and baseball. And then came back, and when my wife and I moved our family back here to Cooperstown, I immediately got involved with the high school baseball program. And Frank Myasek was my coach, and he welcomed me aboard in open arms, and then eventually got on with Mike Niles and the girls basketball program. I was on the coaching staff when we won the state championship, then went to the state final four the next year. And then I did a year with the boys basketball program. And now I am actually also coaching JV soccer for Cooperstown boys. So kind of doing a whole bunch of different things. And I also call games with Nate on the radio, and am currently an adjunct professor at SUNY Oneonta, the sport management program.
Yeah, so this week it's not baseball or basketball related, but one of the news items that we could talk about briefly is the New York State Public High School Athletic Association voting to approve an 8th regular season football game, which is kind of something in the works for a few months now, it seemed. Now they finally got a chance to vote on it. And really what it is they allowed the teams to play 10 games that are now excluding the sectional championships. Whereas before this rule, the original rule said including the sectional championships. So meaning the 3 sectional playoff games plus 7 other ones would be the 10. By excluding that last one, now their teams have more room for that 8th one. Being someone who's been involved in coaching sports at the high school level, what do you think this does from a coaching perspective and the players' perspective to know that they could potentially add an 8th game another week to the schedule and give them another opportunity for all teams to play another game?
Yeah, well, I think it's great when you can get the opportunity to give kids more games. I remember a few years ago they jumped basketball from 18 games to 20. And what's interesting is in the time where a lot of athletic programs' budgets are being cut, to add another game is actually great. I think it's a great opportunity for kids to be able to showcase themselves. They get at least a little bit more involved. 7 games was just, if you didn't have a very successful team, it was a relatively short season. You're playing once a week, but now to be able to look forward to that extra week, a little bit more time, gives a coach another game to actually be able to get kids motivated and really get them that could put them over the hump. I think it's a great opportunity for the kids, and I guarantee that the kids are excited about it.
I had a couple athletic directors and coaches describe it to me, and maybe I'm not 100% on this, but they kind of described it as week 0, where they could potentially choose to either play it as a real game or continue to use it as a scrimmage early in the year. And a lot of coaches were on the fence. Some were worried about the extra pounding and injuries with football of having an early game. Some prefer the scrimmage, etc. But do you like the flexibility, at least, that the state's saying, hey, you know, we're giving you some options? I was honestly surprised that this came up. With all the other things that I thought were going on, I was like, hey, this is positive news that they're putting this out there, and whatever schools decide, do you think coaches will be excited about that?
Yeah, I think they absolutely would be. You know, when you had David on last week talking about, you know, being able to make that schedule, and you guys were talking about different point systems and all that sort of stuff when it came down to sectionals for basketball. I think it's really neat that they can actually look at it from a game standpoint, or they can look at it from as a scrimmage, and really be able to identify themselves with it. I mean, I know the Cooperstown football program this past year, you know, it's in true rebuilding mode right now, and that's 8-man football. And I know that if he has another week, the coach, who's also a Unitigo boy, has the opportunity to be able to work with the players that much more and be able to identify the identity of the team. I think that's a huge advantage for every coach that they definitely look forward to.
Now, some of the reasoning that I saw that the state gave for why this would be a good addition and why they eventually did vote for having an added 8th game is that it gives them, like you said, the playoff teams, or the teams that wouldn't make the playoffs, another week to play and another week to be a team, rather than having such a really short season that lasts less than 2 months. And then also giving a chance for maybe scheduling rivalry games or more inter-class games, some kind of flexibility that allows them to have an extra week rather than trying to fulfill all requirements in such a short time. But some of this, I mean, the Section 3 schedules have already been released for this coming year, given that, of course, everything plays out as scheduled. What would it take, from your experience just in high school sports, working with scheduling and working with different teams, what would it actually take to change the schedule at this point for them to really actually take advantage of this new rule for this fall, given that the schedules were already released, regardless of everything else that's happening with discussions about this fall?
Yeah, well, knowing a little bit about the football side, I don't know a ton about the scheduling side of things, but I know that there's generally, you might have a bye week in there that you can utilize as a scrimmage or something of that nature, or fill it in with, like you said, a crosstown rivalry. I think that's big. I know we've talked about that in baseball. We've always wanted to play Oneonta. You know, it's only 30 minutes away. They've got a great baseball program. We've got a great baseball program. Same thing with basketball. And it just never works out oftentimes because of that point system. But when you don't have to travel and you can have these kids that are growing up with each other and they can actually have the opportunity to play, I think that's huge. So if they utilize it right, you can build it up or give those kids that traditionally wouldn't play a ton another opportunity to play. I think that's a huge underlining story too, which helps your participation numbers, and it also helps the goodwill in the community.
I know that there's obviously a lot of discussion going on with the coronavirus and how it's going to potentially impact fall sports and all of that. And of course, the New York State Public High School Athletic Association has its committee on fall sports that is going to meet in about 10 days on June 10th. That, you know, but in the grand scheme of things, this 8th game, how much does that really matter, or, you know, these different rule kind of changes when we're really looking at whether a season can even potentially take place?
I think it's important to get these things out of the way, if you will, and let those other decisions happen. I mean, we can't predict what's going to happen 4 months from now with the fall season. To where you can have this in limbo. So by them taking this step and approving this, I think that's a great step. It actually makes people feel more optimistic too about the upcoming year and season. I think everybody wants to try to work everything as normal. I know that my friend here, who's the volleyball coach, he was all excited today because he saw their schedule for the winter. I mean, so the athletic directors and everybody in the sections are still working diligently to try to piece that stuff together. And I think that's important because I think it's the mental aspect of that, especially for the athletes, the coaches, the community, parents, is you need to feel like there's going to be something at the end of this road. And I think having those is having that in these discussions is a great opportunity.
It reminds me of what the NHL did this week with coming out with their return to play plan on Tuesday, saying, hey, let's have this whole announcement about what will happen if there is, the season comes back. And the big thing is if the season does return for the NHL. But at least there's the plan and the planning happening, ready to go if they're ready the second that they can come back to click go on this plan. And a lot of the plan was to 12 teams from each conference made the playoffs, or will get a chance to play to be in the playoffs, whatever you want to consider it. The top 4 teams are playing round robin against each other to play for the first seed. The rest of the teams from 5 to 12 are playing each other in a round of 5 round robin kind of style, best of 5 actually. And then they still haven't figured out what happens after that with seeding and with brackets or with round robins for the actual Stanley Cup playoffs. But it seems that, what I've been saying is that now there's this plan. There's been planning happening. There are still details to work out, such as where hub cities will be, which on the East and the West, which 2 places will they choose logistically, in which country, Canada, United States, and also, arenas to have multiple games going on at once. Still a lot of decisions to make, but there is this plan now, and there are matches set, and that kind of does bring that hope to that league.
Yeah, and I really do think that hope is huge. I mean, I'm just because I worked in professional baseball and worked with a lot of the players and some of the people involved, watching what's happening on their side with negotiations between the players and ownership. It's not going anywhere right now, and that's disappointing because that's the most relevant sport at this particular moment. Normally here in May, June, that's the sport you're looking at, as well as the NHL and NBA playoffs. But it's important that people have that. Sports has always been that break. You think back, you being a Mets fan, right? Mike Piazza after 9/11. That is such an iconic moment, and it's because sports gives you that break. It's literally meant as entertainment. That's the whole purpose of it. And right now we don't have that entertainment, and there's a lot of reasons why, and we all can understand it. But at the same time, being able to have those conversations and provide that hope for the community is huge, especially with what's going on right now in the world with what we've been seeing over the last week.
What's interesting to me is that one of the big statements that the commissioner made in his announcement about all this was that they are doing all of this with the knowledge that they 100% are going to have a full season next year. Of course, if it can happen, but the intention is that 100% they don't want to affect whatever the next season will be. And then I was thinking, okay, so when do you have to get everything done by? When would you have to start by to get the next season to start in October? But it turns out that they're actually okay with the season starting as late as January or potentially February. The quote that I read from the commissioner was, maybe we start with the Winter Classic, which is, that would be a completely different shifting seasons. And we could talk a bit also in this conversation, like Nate and I have been talking about, with shifting the high school seasons and sports and things. But it seems like right now there's a lot of movement that who says a sport has to necessarily start on October 16th. This is when the NHL starts, and this is when this ends. That maybe things are just going to move around and maybe stay that way, but at least for this year.
Yeah, that the relevance of that is it's all dictated by the TV and the dollars involved. And so, for instance, I heard somebody talking about it the other day. It's important for the NBA to possibly come back with, I think they were talking 6-7 regular season games, because then that would get players up to 70 games, which kicks in a lot of money for TV contracts. And it gets players paid because what's being asked right now is that players take hits in all the different sports. And that's a huge thing. But I'm with you. I don't know if you agree with it or not, but with what you were saying, sports don't have to go by this specific timeline right now. And I think any time that if we're able to adjust and be able to look at different things, it's huge. One of my friends who I interviewed a couple of weeks ago works with the NFL. I mean, they're planning, they don't even know whether they'll have a Super Bowl that has fans at it, right? I mean, just comprehend that. The biggest event in the world, and it might not even have fans. So when we're talking about high school sports, or we're talking about different things in this area, everybody should just be open to anything at this time and give timeline, especially the major sports or the professional sports. They can at least, you can go to Arizona, you can go to Texas, you can go to Florida, you can go to these different places and take multiple teams there if it's a weather-based situation that could potentially work. Because if you're not going to have fans, you might be able to play multiple games at the same venue. So one of the things that I was talking about to my class that I teach, which is sport facility management, is what does this whole pandemic do to a sports facility, right? I mean, when they talk about having any fans anywhere, even if it's 50 fans, you still have to go over the top with new restrictions and rules by the CDC that are going to dictate a lot of different things. So it's really interesting to see how this is all going to play out, but I really hope that they aren't just set on certain schedules and they're willing to open up to change.
So Matt, I don't want to jump the gun here, Matt, but since you kind of opened that door a little bit, I know you and I had shared an email this week, and we've had a lot of texts and emails back and forth about potentials for changing things up. And I think that you have kind of been a local leader of putting ideas out there and seeing what people have had to say about it. I mean, I know you sent out a tweet a couple of weeks ago that got a lot of response from ADs and coaches and everything. So I was hoping you could kind of throw out your ideas of what you thought could be a possibility for maybe getting some high schoolers back playing some sort of sport.
And we should mention, too, that this is the person who put out the tweet that we've been discussing for a few weeks now, that we discussed. Right. That was the tweet about the alternate high school sports. Yeah. This is him in person.
Yeah.
Virtually,
This is me in person, yeah. No, so, I mean, I like I've said, my background is business sports and scheduling throughout the country pretty much with different professional things that I was doing. And I really think that it's an opportunity that you look at it and everything's got to be open. And what I was doing was I was just sitting there one day. I mean, as a baseball coach, we were expected to have a great baseball season. I was really excited. Feel terrible for the 3 seniors that we have for the Cooperstown baseball program, as well as all seniors for every sport at all schools. But I sat there and I was like, what looks like this? Because as a soccer coach as well, I right now am having difficulty understanding how you're going to be able to play soccer, right? Bodies rubbing against each other. And I look at it as, I was a center on my basketball program or basketball team. How would I post up against somebody? And so I'm sitting there saying, what sports can play with social distancing? I'm an avid golfer. Golf can. Baseball, I believe, can. And I'll come back to that in a second. But cross-country, track, you don't want to have those the same season. The big key is if you were to swap any sports, you can't take a sport from winter, such as bowling, and a sport from the spring and put them both in the fall, because then kids are having to make choices that they shouldn't have to make of which sport that they would rather do. But I think it's important that you look at it differently. So I look at baseball. Baseball, you can take it, it's completely played social distance. You can take the umpire, put him behind the pitcher. You could have it to where each team brings a dozen baseballs with them, and whenever their team takes the field, they use their own baseballs. So then you're not mixing and matching with different communities. The catcher is one that would have to be talked about but if you put them in a special box that's a certain distance away from the batter. there's just, you have to look at things a little bit differently. And I do believe, though, it's important that everybody understands that in the future it would go back to, but why miss out on a whole season of high school athletics if you don't have to? And then what are you going to have if you come back? Let's just say they came back January 1st with all sports and you started with the winter. Then you got the fall sports that missed out too. And some of these kids, especially right now, take a soccer player, they might have missed out on spring soccer, their travel soccer, then fall soccer. How is that going to work with college scholarships, with opportunities? And it's not worried about scholarships. It's just worried about participation in general. But I really do think that these sports can be played with a little bit of ingenuity behind it effectively. And the other thing that I threw out too was I would start, because one of the comments that I got back from my tweet was that the season you would run out of light, you would run into bad weather. I actually would like to see the New York State Public High School Athletic Association answer one of the questions that was put out there by the NFHS, which was, if schools were shut down, okay, if they were still doing internet or distance learning, I think one of the questions was, would you still have seasons, athletic seasons? Would you still be open to that? And I would love to hear the answer to that. But I think that if you can start those seasons in a week or two earlier in August, you can get the seasons done, especially baseball and softball. You can play double headers, no problem. You can have the whole season state championships done by Columbus Day. I really do. And then you go out of the way of flu season. Now, there's some spring sports like lacrosse that might not be able to fit because of the contact with them. But I really do think it'd be an interesting conversation to have. I haven't had any conversations with the state on it, but I'd love to be a fly on the wall for this committee that's going to meet in 10 days.
Now, I imagine that having double headers couldn't be an everyday thing, though, because that's a lot of – there are rules in place as far as pitch counts and how long you can play, but also it just – I imagine an everyday doubleheader would kind of wear out the students a lot.
Yeah, I mean, so what I was proposing too was a 16-game schedule. How often do we get more than 16 games in spring? Not very many because of the weather,
right?
Yeah, because of the weather. I mean, so we actually would have been able to play games in March this year, and we wouldn't have been able to play them in April up here because of the weather. But when you look at it, if you went Tuesday, Thursday, doubleheader Saturday, I think one of the discouraging things that I actually did not like that came out of the executive committee meeting this past week was they're talking about pitch counts specifically for baseball and that you actually build up on it. There was no decisions actually made, but that I saw, but I know that they're talking about building it up. And I don't think any high school kid should be pitching over 100 pitches. I think you really should be developing it at the 6th, 7th grade level and just building them up throughout the program. But when it gets to sectionals, then what you're doing is you're throwing a kid out there for 120 pitches, and it is what it is, but I just don't think it's right. But I think the pitch counts help you actually do a doubleheader in a way, because you're actually only doing 5-inning games as opposed to 7. So you can actually have a pitcher pitch all those games or the entire game comfortably in normal circumstances. But I think it's open to it. Another idea that I threw out there was on a Saturday, you could actually have 3 teams play at the same complex. And they could just alternate, kind of do a round robin thing. So then each team plays each other in a given day. But it also, think about doubleheaders, they also salvage money for transportation, for umpires, for different things, which is big, and keeps that social distancing in place, so then people aren't going there.
Now, you're imagining – sorry, Nate, I just wanted to jump in and just clarify that.
Sure.
You would think that these 3 games at one complex would be without fans, though, because obviously 3 games in one spot would bring a lot of fans to one place if they did have fans.
Yeah, I mean, however the fans that they choose that they do. I mean, what's great about those sports too, a lot of the complexes we play at, you could sit in your car if you wanted to and watch the games, which would be nice. But I think it would be interesting to see when you look at what I was discouraged with in looking at the CDC guidelines, because I'm also on the committee here for youth baseball, and we're trying to make a decision as to when we bring back youth baseball here. Especially in our community, one decision we have made is that it's going to stay within the community. We're not going to have travel teams, but when do we actually get okay? And I was looking at the guidelines for the NFHS, and they put basketball and soccer in the same, and football, or maybe not football, but basketball and soccer in the same category as baseball. And I don't understand from a social distancing and other than we're picking up a ball, throwing it around the diamond. That's the only way that I can actually see it. But it's amazing to see that they're actually in the same grouping when you're talking about the phases. Because personally, I just don't agree with that. But there's smarter people making those decisions than me.
Because you think that baseball and softball can be more socially distant than basketball and soccer.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're in a community, and if you are actually bringing your own baseballs or softballs with you to the complex, which we all have to provide for our home games anyway. So let's just provide it for our team. Our community is the only one touching the baseballs at any given point. Umpires wear gloves, so if they need to check it, they can wear gloves accordingly. I think there's just ways that you can think about it and get rid of the tradition, because we're not going back to tradition in general. And let's just start thinking out of the box. I mean, take soccer. So my wife is a college soccer referee, and I asked her a hypothetical question: would you ever play soccer without throw-ins? Because if it went out, would you just keep it on the ground, and so then your hands are never touching the ball? I mean, and then the goalie is the only person touching the ball because they have gloves on. Those are weird things, right? But like no headers, it's all different things that you have to think about. Yeah, I mean, it'll be just interesting to see. And I actually threw another idea out to Nate. Sorry to kind of ramble on this, but it's another idea, which was, would high schools be willing to pay for athletic programs if there were no competitions? So let's just say that they allowed schools to come back. Could you practice soccer in your community? Let's say pay coaches 50% of what they normally would. You're not having travel, you're not having any of that, but you're actually getting kids together, so then they're developing skills. Because I know as coaches, one of the big things that we're fearful of right now in any sport is a lost season of development, because it is so important that these kids continue to develop their skills.
What I was going to say before was it has cracked me up even before this with the pitch count thing, is that baseball has become so regimented on it. And I've asked some softball players on my podcast about it, but you could pitch a softball girl until her arm falls off. And I know there's different mechanics and different motions, but I mean, even the state championship currently for softball is a doubleheader in one day. So I think you could easily almost switch softball more easily than baseball even, and get those games in. A lot of our teams go to tournaments where they play 3 or 4 games in a weekend if you're going to Mudville or something like that. So I think softball is another great candidate to switch it up if you have to, because they're almost already used to those type of things. So that was my point there to go along, because I think I agree with you, Matt, that if we get a little creative, there's ways to do it. And like your soccer point, instead of a throw-in, just have a free kick every time it goes out. Something like that. Will things be different? Yes, but maybe we can make it work.
Yeah, but maybe the free kick has to stay on the ground versus a penalty, where somebody was called for obstruction, and then you get an actual free kick where you can boot it down the
right.
field. Maybe that. Yep. I mean, that's what it is, and I think there's ADs from throughout the sections that are having these conversations, and we don't know what they're discussing. Maybe this is all stuff that they have discussed, but it's I would love to be be able to share some of these ideas with them, because I don't think they are out of the, so far out there that it can't be accomplished. I think it's just, and there's different metrics. But the one problem that I can't really help with, because I don't work in a school directly, is would you have sports if you don't have kids at the school itself? The reality is, if you walk around your community, you're seeing a lot of the kids together in general.
Right.
But now you're having organization to it, and so it'd be interesting.
I've been doing these sport features that I mentioned earlier on some of the high school senior student athletes who have had their seasons obviously cut short or just completely cut off. One of the seniors that I spoke with was Notre Dame senior Courtney Morris, Notre Dame Utica High School. And what Courtney was talking with me about is that she was the pitcher for Notre Dame softball for 4 years. This would have been the fourth year. And like, she was the pitcher for every single game, including in doubleheaders. So talk about it. That, I mean, I was asking her, how do you not have your arm fall off? And she was like, you just ice really well, and then you're back the next day. She said there was only one game last year that she didn't do, because 2 years ago now, she said she pitched a doubleheader and she knew how her arm did not feel well after that. So she asked another teammate. That was the only game in her high school softball career that she was not the pitcher for. And that's that. I mean, there was no relief pitcher either. Okay, she just pitched every inning. I can't even imagine that. But it's all these discussions that we keep saying it over and over again. But this is a time where everything is different. Sports, if we want them back, is going to have to be different also. But the idea of the seniors leads me to ask you another question, where I know that Cooperstown obviously has had success in the past, sectional champions last year, baseball, right? So I also hear you gotta say that again. The state finals too, right?
State finals.
Yeah, so sectional champions and made it all the way to the state finals. But not only that, but coming into this year, you were expecting to have quite a few seniors back also. So this was poised to be, I mean, you saw the success last year, could have maybe won that next game too.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're in a great time for Cooperstown baseball right now. 2 out of the last 3 years, we've gone to the state final 4. Last year being the state finals, and this year's team with that one more year of experience. We actually had 3 seniors, 2 starters, and the rest were juniors. And it just shows what we will have even coming back next year. But one of them is going to play at Herkimer Community College, Ryan Lansing. And I know that Raz is really looking forward to seeing him. He's a heck of a talent, heck of an athlete. He's left his mark on Cooperstown for sure. But, it's tough, especially, the girls basketball team, watching the girls basketball team and Coach Niles have to end their season the way that they did this year. Excruciating, but you think back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there wasn't even, I'm dating myself, 30 years ago, there weren't state championships. So you actually just had the sectional championship. You win the section championship, it's done. So it's not too far-fetched. But then when you come off of a baseball season like we had last year, and then you're looking forward to this year, and then not even being able to get the opportunity to pick up the ball, it was tough, especially for the boys. They reached out to me a lot. I know to Coach Myasek a lot, and you try to keep them upbeat about everything, but you never know when it would come back. And then when we found out that it wasn't going to come back, obviously excruciating. But hopefully they'll be able to get their summer seasons in later in a couple months.
So what did you say, and what are you saying, if you're still in touch with your players when that happened? Because the same thing that the softball coaches and other baseball coaches that I've spoken to have been saying is, they've not only been looking forward to it, but they've literally been practicing. You practice all year for your sport. It's not like, oh, it's spring now, we could finally start meeting as a team. It's like an all year thing. And they literally have been working all year to this moment. And then they're just like, no, you don't actually get to compete. So what do you say to them in a moment?
Yeah. Well, there's two different groups of kids, right? There's the kids who are just participating. They love it, but they're not really, there's no further ambition beyond high school with it. And they're obviously devastated. Now, what was interesting about the spring, though, is that we had a month and a half of being able to actually digest what was happening. And we were like, okay, well, that's the case. We were going to go down to Myrtle Beach as a team this year to play some scrimmages and get ourselves ready for the season. We had that first canceled. I think that one was harder than the actual season because by that point we were like, okay, well, this isn't going to happen. But what's tough is about all spring athletes, whether it's baseball, softball, track, lacrosse, golf, tennis, whatever you want to say, is that the spring season for high school is their only season is their last opportunity for colleges to see them in the high school ranks, because then they will have already made their decisions for next year or for their colleges before their next spring season, their senior spring season begins. So, we have a couple kids who are looking for some Division I scholarships or at least playing opportunities, and they didn't get that season. So hopefully they'll get the summer season. But, you think about it, basketball, if you're a junior in basketball, you still have the next season to impress some people a little bit further. So, it's those conversations were a little bit tougher, but they're finding ways. They're literally out there 6-7 days a week. We have one kid, Chris Ubner, he literally pushes his dad's dump trucks down the road to keep himself trained. Nate's seen the videos on that. Yeah. But, it's interesting how these kids get creative when they really want to keep on playing and with the passion that they have for it.
Matt, what did you think of, Otsinango Pony League's announcement that they made that said, Pony League was canceled locally for the first time in over 50 years, but they were up to trying to have a fall league if some schools or teams were interested in it. And almost everybody on that email chain said that they would be. So I thought that was a positive sign, at least in terms of maybe some guys getting to play some baseball if they still fit in the Pony League category.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing that they did, because you got to give these kids opportunities, especially I talked before about the development. It is so important especially in baseball. You take time off from hitting. It's not everywhere that you can go to just hit. You can find a spot of soccer ball. You can find a spot to shoot a basketball. You can't just find a spot to go hit baseballs. And so I think it's important that they have that. And when you look at, they made the decision that they were going to be open to the fall. They didn't just cancel it throughout. And I think that's a huge step in the right direction. You don't like to kick the can down the road, but in these situations, you got to kick the can down the road. You got to leave the opportunity open in case some things change, some things clean up, that we can really allow these kids to get back out there.
I was thinking about how the players, you've been obviously in a lot of big moments. You mentioned the basketball championships. You mentioned the baseball success just last year alone. Do you have a favorite memory of being with the current students, or just in general? Because one of the things I've been asking the seniors is what's their favorite memory? What do they remember? So I'm wondering what yours has been over the years. What stands out to you? Which moment is kind of that amazing moment in sports, which we're missing out on those moments a lot of moments this year are happening.
Man, that's a loaded question. From a coaching point, I can give you ones from different scenarios. A few years ago, I was battling cancer during the state championship run for girls basketball. I was in the hospital, and in the semifinals, I'm watching this game on the computer in my hospital room, and Maria Noto hit a 3-pointer against the defending state champions to give Cooperstown the lead with just under a minute left, and then we went on to win. and advance to the state finals to then become the state champions. To watch that was just awesome. So cool. And the baseball side of things, you know, there's a lot that I could pull. We've had a number of walk-offs. Riley Hall, who's one of the best kids that you'll ever have, he walked out. This is the moment I can really talk about, but he walked up to the with one of the most accomplished careers in baseball at Cooperstown. He walks up to the plate and he hits a home run to give us a lead in the 6th inning, and his first home run of the year, and just stamping his legacy on the program. And then he loaded bases loaded it out in the mound the next inning, and I walked out and I was talking to him and I said, listen, bud, there's nobody else I'd rather have on the mound right now. He then struck out the next 2 guys, and that was just such a rewarding moment to see a kid come, because he started off with a 3-12 record his first season, to then making it to the state Final Four by his senior season. To watch that all play out in that moment, tremendous. But, you know, you can talk about certain kids and certain moments, but the reality is, as a coach, you just watch the development of kids from when they're 13, 14 years old to when they graduate, whether it's 17, 18, 19 years old, and you watch what they become as not just players, but as people. That is really why you do this. It's the most rewarding thing in the world. And I've had the opportunity to be a part of a lot of successful teams, but that's because I've had tremendous kids and coaches that I've been able to work with. So it's hard to pinpoint on certain items, because I could make a laundry list of kids who have been fun to watch their development over the years.
And that's exactly where I wanted to go with the next question was, not only are these moments not happening this year, unfortunately, so you miss those all those stories that Nate and I get to cover, but that you as a coach get to experience. But what is it as a coach? How do you get a group of students who may or may not know each other beforehand, or may or may not have played with each other to the same extent? What do you do to get a group of people to work together to a point where they can achieve the success that the teams you've coached have?
Yeah, you know, here's what I think is one of the lost arts of high school sports in general, is that we talk about specialization, we talk about different things. Back in the day, you played 3 sports, and that's just what you were doing, right? You played for your friends, you played for this might not be my favorite sport, but I'm doing it to stay in shape for this sport. And I think that's something that you got to try, that we try to preach. Listen, basketball might be your sport, but this sport, baseball, is your buddy's sport. And he's playing basketball with you. You should be here playing with him. And I think what's made Cooperstown very successful over the years is we have coaches not only that believe that, and we push people to other sports to be playing year-round, but we have unbelievable athletes that come through. The Clark Sports Center is in our backyard. We're very fortunate to have that. And so these kids grow up playing every sport together. So there is that natural passion that comes with it. And I think when you can the key to coaching to me is really just about motivation. They either have the talent or not. You can give them some skills that can help them develop some things, but if you can get them all rallying towards a common goal, that's the key. And that's something that we developed with the baseball program. And I know Niles did with the girls basketball program. Dave Bertram did with the boys. And now you're seeing it with John Lambert and all the other sports, Frank Mysak soccer. I mean, and not just at Cooperstown, all these other successful, even in the area, is you win, it breeds success because people want to be part of that culture and are willing to go above and beyond to try to accomplish it, because they understand, all right, this coach actually knows what he's talking about. He's not mom and dad, who probably know as well, but it's just another voice to actually hear from.
While we have a high school baseball coach on a call with us, you talked about the NFHS guidelines. I don't know why none of us can say that right today. NFHS guidelines. And, you know, I looked at the different phases, and we spoke about them last week too, was how phase one with the, no locker rooms, sanitizing all time, groups of 10 only, spread out. You said it was possible to have the sport more than the other ones, baseball and softball, because they are more spread out. But when, how is it possible, do you think, to have in effective season if you're not able to have your whole team together? And when you look at those rules, how feasible is it to get the sport to come back following the national guidelines that have been given, even if it's going to be this fall because it's more social distance, or even, you don't know what's going to happen, but even by the time we get to the spring, it seems like those rules are so specific and detailed. Can it happen, and can it allow the teams to be successful?
So it's a tough question to look at from both ways. One is, when you look at the guidelines, they have a tough job, right? They have to be able to look at this from a national side of things. We're in rural New York, and we don't have the same situation that Albany does, and Buffalo and New York City, etc. And for us, even Utica, it's a small metropolitan area, and it's hard for us to really wrap our heads around the huge global pandemic that is going on. When you want to bring the sport back, I think there's got to be an understanding with it of what you have to do to try to bring it back, and bring it back safely and effective. I think the guidelines, personally, I think it's a little bit over the top from a national perspective. I would love to be able to see New York State do it more like a regional aspect, like we're doing with the phases throughout the country or throughout the state of when you're bringing back businesses, when you're opening up different things. I think it would be interesting to be able to see that. The fear is, if I pick up a baseball and and I pitch it to my catcher, and my catcher then throws it to second base to try to throw somebody out, during that whole transaction, you have no idea whose grandmother has diabetes or asthma or something like that and could get sick. That's the concept behind this. And we all get that. But are there ways that we can take it into effect? You can't play baseball with gloves. You just can't. You can hit with gloves. You can't throw with gloves. It's not effective. So it'd be interesting to see how they could do it. I think they're a little bit over the top. I understand why they're over the top, but are there ways to do it? I would love to see, if you're asking me, I would love to see New York State be willing to offer sports if there is no in-classroom teaching, because we all are still there for the education of things. But I truly believe that extracurriculars and sports are part of that educational experience, and it's important that those are part of the conversation, not the secondary part. I think they need to be part of the primary conversation, because we all know that they bring kids to school that otherwise may not come to school. So I think that's important to have this. So I would love to see those come back, and I'd love to see New York State look at it. I'd also like to see New York State look at having sports when school isn't in session. So why can't we be playing games in August? Why do we have to wait for the first day of school or the week leading up to be able to have sports? I threw out the idea, like, this summer. Why does baseball have to start in March? Couldn't baseball start in April and go until first part of July? Colleges play their World Series a month and a half after college classes end. It's just interesting to see if we can start looking at things a little bit different. The winter season, the spring seasons are all compressed into 10 weeks. And it's just not, I think it could be more effectively done.
My final question for you right now is, and I'm sure we'll have more in the future, and we'll keep in touch with you even after this episode. I just like to ask everyone in general, nothing to do with the current situation, but do you have a favorite quote or mentality that kind of sticks with you? And if so, what is it, and why does it mean something to you?
Oh boy. So that's a very good question. When I look at this, and the mentality that I have is that, you can get a little bit more out of every kid than they think that they can perform, if you will. And I think that was taught to me at a young age by a basketball coach around here, which, you think that you are at this level, but when you have somebody that believes that you're at this level, the opportunities to be able to achieve a little bit more is huge. And, I'm a huge New England Patriots fan, but Bill Belichick's do-your job is just simple. We emphasize that in baseball. You make an error in practice, you run. You do some different things. When you can teach people to try to be as close to perfect as possible, when it comes to this, they start realizing things that they didn't think was possible that they could do. And so I think if we continue to preach that, I think the kids really benefit from it. So that's what I try to live by when I'm trying to coach and work with kids.